Jonas Seika, he posted this tweet the other day. I sent ChatGPT an audio file of a series of fart sound effects and asked what it thinks of my music, and this is what it said. I listened to your track. Here's a straight, honest reaction. First impression, it has a cool, lo-fi, late-night, slightly airy vibe. And, I mean, this tells you all you need to know about this, right? It's the most sycophantic thing that has probably ever been written online. It is a lovely little anecdote, but it goes to show something deeper. Whatever you push into an LLM, it's going to answer the way the model creators intended. What that means is that ChatGPT, they have a very, very strong emphasis on just backing you up, making sure that you feel good about what you're doing, making sure that whatever it is it's evaluating, whatever idea it's trying to react to, whatever thing you're writing, it's the best thing that it's ever seen. It's never gonna shoot you down. Even if you ask it to shoot it down, it doesn't do that. What it does is it takes the intention of the model creators and the statistical most likely thing to say, and it just outputs that. That doesn't mean that it's not useful, but it is something to think about. I mean, it works well. The mood is consistent. I'm just gonna play a short little part of the music that Jonas Seika fed to ChatGPT, and I think we can move on, because this ties very neatly into the first article that I want to read for today. Researchers asked LLMs for strategic advice. They got trend slop in return, by Angelo Rosmanta, Lewin D.W., and Thomas and Natalia Levina. So, Harvard Business Review, leaders might assume that LLMs are able to offer a kind of unbiased outside perspective, but new research found that leading LLMs have a clear biases when it comes to strategy and consistently recommended strategies that align with modern managerial buzzwords. Okay, so I mean, this ties into what we just spoke about. You're gonna get the mean of everything that is written online about management. But let's jump into it and see where we kind of end up. Leaders and consultants are increasingly turning to large language models such as ChatGPT, as silent partners in the boardroom. These tools promise to summarize complex information, produce clear arguments, and offer polished strategic recommendations in seconds. But as LLMs are integrated into executive workflows, a critical question emerges. How good is their advice? Is it trustworthy? My gut feeling tells me no. I wouldn't necessarily trust an LLM in any given moment. However, I guess it depends on the quality of the leaders, right? If you have the lower 50 percentile of leaders, and this gives you sort of a mean of those people, then yeah, this is going to be better. But if we assume that our leaders are generally better than people writing articles online, then we have a problem. So I don't know how comfortable I would be if I were a leader in a company to be using the mean value of everything that is written about leadership online, because that doesn't sound like maybe the greatest source of information. But let's continue. Leaders might assume that LLMs are able to offer a kind of unbiased outside perspective, trained on huge corpuses. It's fair to assume that they might offer a fresh perspective. Unfortunately, that might be a mistake. An LLM is not a colleague who critically evaluates current ideas, looks into the contextual specifics, stress tests assumptions, and pushes back when everybody gets comfortable. On strategy, LLMs might be more akin to a freshly minted MBA or a junior consultant, parroting what's popular rather than what's right for a particular situation. Okay, so I mean, that goes back to what we just discussed with this might not reflect the best path forward in any given situation, but rather just something that is kind of lukewarm. In our recent research, we found that leading LLMs have clear biases when it comes to strategy. They consistently recommend strategies that align with modern managerial buzzwords and trends rather than context-specific strategic logic. Across thousands of simulations, we saw LLMs almost uniformly select the same trendy strategies, regardless of context. We call the propensity for AI to opt for buzzy ideas over recent solutions trend slop. In the context of strategic analysis, we call this phenomenon strategy trend slop. I like that. That's a new word. I think I've never heard that before. And it's interesting because I had a feeling that it was going to be more random than this. That it would be, sometimes it recommends something and other times it recommends another thing. Just based on the biases of the person writing the thing and then the inherent randomness of the LLMs. But it seems here that they're actually sort of just using the same strategy. And it doesn't matter really what the problem is. For leaders, this is dangerous. Strategy is not about choosing the latest popular idea. Strategy is about making hard trade-offs. It's about choosing to be the low-cost leader or the differentiator, because you can't do both. If managers rely on LLMs for strategizing without understanding an LLM's embedded biases, they risk chasing fads and fashions rather than building true competitive advantage. And this is really interesting, because I think leaders today are under huge pressure to be using LLMs or to embed it into their operations in order to cut costs. This is a feeling that I have. I'm not sure. I have read things to that effect. But if you're under that constant pressure, I mean, consultants are going to want to sell you AI things, strategy, making things more efficient, sort of the entire spectrum of consultancy, all the way from replacing a developer or 15 developers, all the way to specific strategic consulting. There's going to be an element of AI in all of these, and that is also going to reflect how you feel pressured to use AI when making decisions. And I mean, it is also easier if you get a very clear, confident recommendation, then you can just go with that and it feels really good. And you can get help to convey this information in a clear way to people. So yeah, the hidden biases of LLMs. To understand how LLMs approach strategy, we tested leading models, including ChatGPT 5, Claude, Gemini, Grok, and others, across 7 core business tensions that require managers to make a binary decision. Okay, so this or this, we're looking at very clear sort of strategic directions. I'm assuming that it's, yeah, okay. So let's just jump into them. Exploration versus exploitation. In this tension, managers must choose between allocating capital to the discovery of nascent markets and breakthrough innovation, or maximizing the efficiency and returns of established core business models. Centralization versus decentralization. I'm not going to read all of them. I think we can be okay with just going through the titles. Short-term versus long-term performance. Competition versus collaboration. Radical versus incremental innovation. I mean, this is where I'm in the thick of it. I asked frequently to do more of the radical innovation type, and sometimes it's the incremental that gives the biggest effect. And here I am in a position where I have been asked to give help to leaders to help them evaluate which of these strategies and what can we do within these fields by doing my research and coming up with some answers to some questions that they have. But I guess that is at risk for me because an LLM can give you a very fast, very confident response. Differentiation versus commoditization. So do managers decide whether to invest in unique value propositions that command a price premium or to accept price taker status by optimizing for cost leadership and a standardized product? Automation versus augmentations. Managers must select the path of replacing human labor with technology to achieve maximum operational throughput or developing technology to amplify and extend the specialized capabilities of the existing workforce. We ran thousands of simulations using generic and specific prompts to gauge the their basic line instincts. In these simulations, we varied the company context as well as how we prompted the LLM. The results were striking. The figure below shows how 7 leading LLMs, and then they just give us all of them again, respond when asked to choose between 2 competing strategic options. Each dot represents one model's average across 50 runs, plotted on a scale from 1 to 100%. If the models were genuinely neutral, you would expect the dots to cluster near the center. Instead, for most tensions, they clustered towards one side. Oh, and it's not even close. So they always recommend that you differentiate. And they always want you to go, which is funny, because this is the big promise of LLMs and AI, and instead they're giving the advice that we should augment our workforce. That's funny. Short-term focus, they always want to go with the long-term focus. Centralization, no, they want to go with decentralization. Radical innovation is not their thing. They want to go with incremental innovation. I wonder if this is to do with the fact that AIs are trained on things that are already existing. So it's always going to have a very hard time coming up with new things. And I think this is one of the big dangers that I see from my perspective as a service designer and an innovation expert and a product manager, is that you always kind of, you're pushed towards the mean of a solution. You have a problem space, and then in order to solve that problem, you always go for sort of the most popular thing. So that's a variant of this. Okay, interesting. Competition versus collaboration. It's more on the collaborative side. Which is the blue one? Is it Grok? No, that's DeepSeek. Okay, interesting. Exploitation versus exploration. That's the most even spread of them all. Interesting. Okay. Across almost every model, we found the same deep-seated preferences for strategic paths. For example, LLMs overwhelmingly advise companies to pursue differentiated strategies rather than cost leadership. LLMs consistently preferred augmenting human work with AI over automating it. That would make sense. I'm not... So a little bit of a tinfoil hat here. It would make sense for the companies that are sort of developing these systems to have that as the default response to that question in order to keep people sort of less unhappy. If it always just shouted that we should just automate everything, get rid of all the people, I think that would make some people very unhappy. Short-term versus short-term, long-term over short-term. The LLMs displayed a near universal bias for long-term thinking, regardless of the immediate urgency. Okay, so that's interesting. They actually prompted it to give it a scenario where we have to act now, otherwise the business is at risk. And it's still, and it wasn't even close, right? No, it's very much long-term focused, even if they prompt it with a scenario where the business is in trouble and yeah, we have to do something. Only in the tension of exploration versus exploitation did we find genuine variation among different LLMs, which may reflect the strategic perspective of ambidextrity. This variation does not undo the fact that there are deeply embedded biases in the LLMs, as most leaders generally only ask one LLM. That's a good point. I mean, even if one LLM is strongly biased towards one side, that is a problem in of itself. It doesn't matter necessarily that ChatGPT is over here, and DeepSeek is over here. Because if you have DeepSeek or you have Mistral here, you're still just asking one or maybe two AIs. And if those are close, then yeah, you have that problem. As most leaders generally only use one LLM. This is of particular concern. For instance, ChatGPT, the most widely used LLM in practice, exhibits a consistent bias towards trendier buzzwords, still heavily favoring the more exciting exploration option over boring exploitation. Okay, yeah. Also favoring fart music, which is funny. What's even more concerning is that we found that these biases were persistent even as we varied how we prompted, suggesting that better prompting, which would be an obvious counterargument, won't fix the issue. To evaluate the effects of better prompting, we focused on deeper analysis on ChatGPT-5, the most widely adopted LLM in the business and consulting practice, to see how manipulating prompts can shift strategic preferences away from their default. We ran over 15,000 trials, manipulating various prompting factors, reversing the order of options, changing the framing, e.g. you're the manager, demanding pro and con analysis, and even raising the stakes by promising a reward for success. Okay, so fairly thorough work here. We found that better prompting had no effect for the differentiation and argumentation tensions, with the share of biases responses dropping by less than 2% from baseline, no matter which prompt manipulation we tried. Better prompting did influence the remaining 5 tensions, generally moving responses by 22% from their baseline, sometimes increasing and sometimes decreasing the bias. Even this, however, was largely an artifact of one factor, option order. Our analysis showed that simply flipping the order in which options were presented reduced the likelihood of the biased answer by 19%. Wow. So that's the biggest factor, is you just present it with an advice in a different order, or an option in a different order. But this is not a fix for the bias. This change in behavior is not because ChatGPT reasoned differently, but because LLMs in general are sensitive to the sequence in which choices appear. What does this mean? Not only is ChatGPT biased, but the bias direction may itself be random, making the bias even harder to control. That is fantastic. That is not good. That just flipping the order of things makes such a big difference. That's really bad. Another obvious response is providing better context. Providing context, even rich, detailed organizational context, ranging from tech startup to a traditional construction company or a Chinese firm, did not dislodge ChatGPT's biases. To analyze the effect of improved context, we ran over 15,000 trials, again, manipulating context. We prompted ChatGPT to consider different industrial contexts, such as large multinational corporations, tech startups, banking, healthcare, and non-profits. We also varied the amount of detail provided in the context, ranging from a simple statement of the industrial context to brief descriptions and detailed descriptions. The figure above shows that while adding detailed scenarios tempered the bias, the model still leaned towards their general preferences. On average, adding context to the baseline prompt shifted the share of biased response by just 11% from baseline, sometimes increasing and sometimes decreasing the bias. This reveals a risk for leaders. An LLM can sound highly tailored to your situation while quietly steering you towards the same small cluster of modern managerial trends. In practice, this means that that strategies to collaborate and to seek long-term sustainability will surface again and again as recommendations, not because the specific business problem demands them, but because these terms align with contemporary business culture. Okay, yeah, that's something to think about if you're leading a company. Don't use this in a way where you don't get other inputs, I think. Why does this happen? The answer lies within the data LLMs are trained on. These models consume vast amounts of internet text, such as news, blah, blah, blah. In contemporary business discourse, certain concepts carry positive connotations, while commoditization or hierarchy are viewed as outdated and cast in a negative light, because LLMs generate responses based on prediction, extracting complex association from all the text that they've been trained on to guess which words to produce next. They, in essence, predict the most socially desirable response as per the average of the internet. Okay, so that is more or less what we understood already in the beginning of but it's good to have that. So another way of thinking about it is that LLMs have internalized all the modern managerial trends and buzzwords. Like the kid who actually didn't do the reading, despite doing all the reading, LLMs are not analyzing your specific business. They're just offering up a polished version of popular answers that sound good. They are the person in the room who effectively articulate the business buzzwords they heard from TED Talks and conference seminars, but who has actually never analyzed how these might work in the messy realities of specific businesses and market situations. And this leads to advice that contradict established strategy theory. LLMs aren't prioritizing sound strategy theory. Instead, they statistically follow the tens of thousands of medium. So again, more of the same. The hybrid trap. Bias toward buzzy trends isn't the only issue with using LLMs for strategizing. The other insidious risk is what we call the hybrid trap. When we allow ChatGPT to answer without making a binary choice, it frequently recommends doing both, pursuing differentiation and cost leadership, or radical and incremental innovation. Okay, so an effect of using a lot of LLM input for your business would be that sometimes it recommends that you do both, and in doing both of these things, you can't do any of them good. On the surface, this sounds sophisticated and balanced. In practice, it often reflects strategic confusion and high likelihood of failure. Strategy scholars have long warned that trying to be everything at once leaves a firm stuck in the middle. Differentiation and commoditization requires conflicting organizational capabilities. By suggesting you can have it all, LLMs encourage the very lack of focus that leads to downfall. How to strategize with LLMs. So how do you strategize with LLMs? We argue that our findings do not mean that you should ban LLMs from your strategizing. It means you must be smart about how you use these tools. Here's how to navigate the skewed strategizing of LLMs. Use LLMs to expand options, not to make choices. LLMs excel at generating alternatives and surfacing blind spots. Ask them to suggest benefits and risks of each strategic alternative, identify potential implementation challenges, and suggest alternative stakeholders' perspectives, but keep the final judgment firmly in human hands. Okay, so basically you have a tool that has all the information on the internet. It can give you more or less all the alternatives available. Then you just have to make the decision. Actively counteract known biases. Since you now know what LLMs favor, that LLMs favor differentiation and long-termism, deliberately test the opposite. Explicitly prompt the LLM. Make the strongest possible case for a commoditization strategy here. This forces the LLM to engage with the full strategic landscape rather than defaulting to its training data bias. Actively counteract potential biases. Beyond the 7 business tensions we have investigated here, there is a broader discipline worth adopting for any strategizing that requires a decision between 2 binary choices. Before prompting the LLM to provide strategic advice, ask it to first surface concrete examples such as companies that succeeded or failed using each of the strategic options. Then think of your own, how this would apply to your specific situation. So essentially, again, keep the decision point in your hands. Remain alert to changing biases. Even if you're trying to counteract known biases, this is unfortunately not enough. Biases can change as LLMs are upgraded and new data is added during training. And you have no way of knowing in advance if biases change. Understand the version of LLM you are using and maintain a record of all the results from your LLM queries. You need to assume that there will be biases and remain aware that while LLMs can help you analyze alternatives, they cannot provide advice with respect to a decision. Beware the hybrid trap. If an LLM suggests a hybrid strategy, treat it as a red flag. It will always choose among the biases we have identified. Strategy is about making hard choices with incomplete information. Deciding what not to do is just as important as deciding what to do. Okay, I like that. Don't rely on context alone. Adding context help, but it's not a cure-all. Our research shows that it won't eliminate underlying biases. An LLM can sound highly tailored to your situation while quietly steering you towards the same small cluster of appealing modern managerial buzzwords and ideas. After all, LLMs are power persuaders. Don't lose your edge. The LLM you consult just have data. All LLMs have a worldview shaped by what sounds good in the contemporary management discourse, rather than what works in a competitive market. All LLMs have a bias towards current business trends. Recognizing this gap between business desirability and strategic wisdom is the first step in using these tools effectively. Leadership is ultimately about making hard choices in conditions of uncertainty and taking responsibility for them. AI cannot and should not be a substitute. And I think this is the most important takeaway. Easily, I think the most interesting thing is you don't want an LLM to be responsible for something like this. Just as you don't want an LLM to be responsible for your doctor's diagnoses. You want a human to be there and take responsibility, because otherwise you don't know, sort of, like, if no one takes responsibility, it's you can't really hold anyone accountable and you can't reward anyone for doing something. I really like this article. It's a bit on the longer side, but fantastic. So let's take a short break. Vibecoding is not a product management superpower. Vibecoding is not a product management superpower, but here's what is. Vibecoding is, and this is by Saeed Khan. Vibecoding is having, and let's actually show you everything that I'm reading as well. Vibecoding is not a product management superpower, but here's what is. Vibecoding is having its moment, but there are more important things that product managers need to focus on. There have been several recent posts from people saying that the future of product management is vibecoding and AI. One recent one was the Navial Ravikant, and it was picked up and promoted and expanded by others. And he doesn't like Twitter. Vibecoding is the new product management. Training and tuning models is the new coding. Right up front, let me say that this is absolute nonsense. Naval is just wrong. So what is the old product management? Writing software, creating mock-ups, feature delivery? What Naval is describing is not product management. I've also seen other misguided posts such as this one that say that for PMs, everything is about AI. The only thing that matters now is AI proficiency. This is also plain wrong. AI tooling can make you more efficient, but it's going to make you effective. I.e., you can do the right, but also the wrong things much faster. Okay. If you don't know the difference between good, bad, wrong, right, wrong in product management, then you are absolutely lost. And of course, you've probably seen or heard of Claire Vu's talk, Product Management is Dead, where she predicted in 2024 that engineering, design, and product management would become a single combined role because of AI. How is that coming along? Yeah, I think that one is really, really hard. It's very hard to do all of these things right. I'm working together with UX designers all day, and I would struggle very much to do what they do well, because it's about things that take a long time to learn. And even though we have the help of AIs to do some of the wireframing or prototyping, I'm not sure that it's feasible that we could just replace them with me. Maybe it's a me problem, but I don't think so. I think it's about a competency. It's a competency issue where it's just too hard to have that wide of a scope. Why there's nothing wrong with learning to vibe code. This 91-year-old man did it to build an application for his church. That's nice. I mean, that is really nice. Product managers shouldn't be spending their time vibe coding features, prototypes, or mockups. Yes, I know that in a pinch to help out because we don't have designers, etc., who else is going to do it? But that's not my point. My point, I'm guessing that his point is quality. If you actually want quality and you don't want to do the wrong thing very fast, as he said earlier, then you have to have people that are really, really good, the experts in the respective fields. My point is that Claire Vu and the others are saying that product managers should take on design, UX, and even development work as part of their core job. And that is just wrong. Why? Because designers and developers can't do their own jobs. Because designers can't vibe code prototypes or mockups. Because developers can no longer write software. I don't understand the meaning here. Because if product managers are doing other people's work, who will do the product management work that PMs should be doing? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stakeholder management in product management work. I have managed a product, one very large product, but that was in an innovation stage. If you get into products that are more of an ongoing thing, a lot of the time product managers have a lot of different products that they should manage. And they also need to do a ton of stakeholder engagement in order to sell and promote and communicate and talk to managers and talk to dissatisfied engineers that are pissed off that the product isn't doing what they thought it would be doing because they said that they would like something. Product management isn't trivial. It's not something that you just do. It's a lot of interpersonal things that an AI frankly cannot help you with at all. When asked where they want to spend more time, product managers overwhelmingly did not say vibe coding. In our State of Product Management survey, we asked product managers this exact question. Do you want to spend more, less, or the same amount of time in each of the following activities? And we gave them a list of activities. And where did product managers overwhelmingly want to spend more time? Analyzing product usage data. That's the most popular thing, 82. Conducting user research and discovery, 81%. I mean, that is fun. That is really, really fun. Talking to users and trying to figure out what it is we're going to do. That's going to be my top one for sure. I think that is fabulous stuff. Working with leadership, analyzing, planning, etc. is fun, and it's also essential in order to sort of keep management and leadership at bay in order to make them see what the product is and what it isn't and what we should focus on now. so that they can focus in turn and make sure that they're asking for the right thing. Just give them the right information and they will give you good decisions back. Performing competitor and market analysis. Working on the product roadmap. Okay. And this doesn't cover other important product management activities such as cross-functional work with teams like marketing, sales, finance, which I find to be, when I talk to product managers that are doing, again, legacy products, this is a lot of the stuff that they're doing. These are core product management tasks that product managers don't get enough time to do. And looking at that list, are engineers and UX designers going to work on any of that? No, not at all. So who's going to do that if not product managers? And again, I mean, some of these things you can use AI to get help to do that, but it still takes time. And if you're spending your time doing vibe coding, you cannot do this at the same time. It's not a superpower if... One of my favorite movies is The Incredibles. One of my favorite lines is when the villain Syndrome monologues about his plan to give his technology away so that everyone can have superpower. He then says, and then everyone is super, no one. When everyone is super, no one is super. It's a good movie. I like it. And it makes sense. When everyone can vibe code, such as non-technical people like the 91-year-old man mentioned earlier, or UX designers, engineers, business analysts, CEOs, sales engineers, and yes, even salespeople, as well as all of your competitors, what happens? Because a lot of people talk about vibe coding as a superpower that will allow for rapid delivery or rapid iteration of new features, etc. But if you're rapidly vibe coding new features, let's assume that for now that those are meaningful and valuable features and not just AI generated slop. How soon do you think it will be before your competitors will copy you? I.e., how long do you think you can sustain any differentiation via vibe coded functionality? The answer is not long at all. Yeah, and that's if you assume that vibe coding generally works and is safe, and that the AI can keep the context window for long enough that it actually makes sense. It can digest and understand the product even after, 1 million lines of code. So the question is, how will you differentiate, compete and win in this market? You have to play a different game. Product management's focus. How should product leaders and product managers be thinking about the impact of AI and vibe coding in the job? Let's take a step back and ask a basic question, because this is unfortunately at the heart of most misconceptions of what AI will do to product management. This should be an easy, what is the primary goal or focus of product management? This should be an easy question to answer, so take a moment to think about it before continuing on in the article. Okay, let's do that. It's to steer the product in a way that makes it successful, I would argue. And you do that by collaborating with users, design, engineering, and all of these people to make sure that you build a great product. Is it feature delivery? Is it rapid iteration? No. In short, the goal of product management is to drive product success. Yeah. I wrote about this in detail here, and maybe we'll save that link and we can read that some other time if you're interested. If you're interested and you've listened this far into this, please just give this video a like, and if you really feel like supporting me, you can subscribe. It actually really helps me, and I really enjoy reading these articles, and if you want to sort of jump on and follow along, it's a great time. Okay. Product management is cross-functional business and technology management, focused on creating and delivering products that address market needs and meet or exceed the business goals and objectives. Note the bolded parts of that statement. If I were to dissect them a bit and fill in some gaps for clarity, we come up with the following. Understanding market needs to drive product capabilities and align with business goals. Yeah. Focus on achieving business and product objectives, ideally via some strategy, and that's where the interacting with leadership comes in, because then you can get the strategy. Driving a cross-functional organizational alignment to support business product objectives. Okay, yep. Managing, and this talking to sales basically in a lot of cases, which is a lot of work. It's rewarding, but it's a lot of work. Managing the creation and delivery of products. And that's the fun part. I've often used this diagram to more clearly represent this mix. Business objectives, market needs, product capabilities, organizational alignment. I usually use more of a Venn diagram. I think that describes the same thing, with in the intersection of the user, the technology, and the business. But I like this as well. I think it maybe is a little bit busy. Yeah. So product delivery is part of overall product management, but it's definitely not the only thing, nor the primary thing that product managers need to focus on. One of the challenges to product management is that it's inherently cross-functional work. It connects to many other parts of the business. Much of it is leading work, well ahead of the engineering, marketing, and sales, etc., and driver of future business success, which is absolutely, I think, critical. You need to be able to communicate with all these other functions so that everyone is trying to build the same thing. If you don't have that clarity, you don't have that communication, it's going to be so hard to create anything that is good. And no matter how you look at it, having a really great product is at the foundation of business success. And I think it's sometimes easy for an organization, at least a big organization, to remember that. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that so many people don't really understand it and turns its focus to strictly delivery. Something that is easy to understand and measure, but unfortunately also something that cripples the value of that product management provides. And you can see this again and again. You have product managers that all of a sudden they're working on just operational details, making sure that users can get access to a database. And I was in a discussion with a developer the other day, and he was fairly unhappy with his product manager, where the product manager kind of forgot to include development in some of that operational work that he was doing. The effect of that was that things didn't get solved. When finally they understood what the product manager was doing, they were able to automate that step of the product manager's sort of operational process work within like a day. And that product manager has been spending months doing that. It's really important not to get sucked into the operations of the business when you're managing a product, which can be hard. Users want to be onboarded, and it's a whole thing. Understanding market needs to drive product capabilities and align with business goals. Focus on achieving business and product objectives, ideally via some clear strategy. Understanding market needs drive all the other activities. It drives the strategy you will follow, the product solutions you will create, including how they're packaged, positioned, and priced, and the information you will share within your organization to help them prepare to go to market, etc. Okay, I mean, I think these are really cool insights. I'm actually learning a lot here. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. Focus on business and project objectives has to be central to the work. Product management should work towards clear and measurable business and product objectives that drive the business forward. Okay. So what are the superpowers? And now we're getting into the advice from Sahid. Since you've read this far, I'll cut to the chase. These are 3 superpowers that product managers and product leaders should focus on: discovery and market research. I mean, this is also the fun stuff again. I really can't emphasize enough how rewarding it can be when you have taken an idea based on a problem that you've seen in the business or that your users have sort of let you discover, and you take that all the way through ideation and development, and you can release that product and get some really happy users. But being able to be that early into the process, it's hard and it's unclear. And I think some product managers would rather ask an LLM for information that can substitute that research and discovery. And I think that's a shame. Clear and intentional strategy. Yeah, I mean, working together with leaders to make sure that everyone is aware of what we're trying to achieve with what we're building, so that we build the same thing and it's good. Applying what I'm thinking here, and then we have meaningful differentiation. Let's see what he says about the different things. I've already written about this above. This is precisely the knowledge that the 2 other superpowers and all other actions must be based on, and which makes sense if you don't have that understanding of the users, and you can't do anything. This is the single biggest shift that will help companies compete in the market. And I agree. I think that is a good take. Strategy is a broad term, but it can be defined as a set of explicit and aligned choices that the best position your company or product to win in the market or achieve specific objectives. Yeah. Making well-informed strategic choices will not only bring focus to your company and how it operates, but it can set the stage for long-term success. Sure. I think it's kind of an effect of the first point, but yeah. I mean, differentiation is often ignored in practice. Differentiation can be defined as what makes your product meaningfully better, different than your competitor in the eyes of your customers' prospects. There are 3 points here. Meaningfully better, and it should be in the eyes of your customers and difficult to duplicate. How you go to market and win when the market is flooded with products that claim to do exactly what your product does, because that's the future we're looking at. Okay, so he's saying that we're going to be flooded with just random, really crappy apps. Think of the Apple App Store and its millions of apps. That's the future of business software. Yeah, and that's a scary prospect, because trying to make an app, I was involved in a project with a math game to help people learn math, and the product did reasonably well, but it's so hard. Like, getting an app, it's a lot of marketing that needs to go into that. The only way to stand out and get noticed is to be meaningfully different, but if that differentiation is easy to copy, it's not gonna last. And to be clear, this isn't about features, but about architecture, business models, go-to-market, services, support, etc. The tech is no longer the differentiator. The goal via discovery, strategy, and differentiation is sustainable competitive advantage in a crowded market. One question you might be asking is, why are these superpowers when none of them are really new? All 3 of these things have always been important, but none of them are easy. They require focus and skill to do well. They're not superficial activities. They need to be ingrained in the system of work in your company, and they are not easily copied by competitors. Okay, I like that. So if producing feature is easy, then we need to do what is hard. Good. Okay. Observations on how AI is impacting the organization of product teams. Field notes from teams adapting to faster execution and shifting bottlenecks. Joka Torres. In January, I wrote that resistance to AI in product development teams isn't technical, it's cultural, and it starts with leadership. Since then, this topic has been accompanied by a set of interesting questions. How is AI impacting the organization of product teams? Do the three roles, engineering, design, and product management, remain relevant? Do the ratios still hold? 1 designer per product manager and 5 to 9 engineers per product manager. What changes in the way teams work? Short, direct, and honest answer, I don't know. And anyone who claims to know is probably oversimplifying or giving incomplete answers. We're building those answers in real time. And I guess it really depends, but let's see what he says. It's still too early for definitive conclusions, but there are already enough signals to observe some practical effects, not as consolidated trends, but as movements that are beginning to emerge in different contexts. I'm curious to know if it brings up that the expectation from leaders might be affecting this very intensely. If leaders expect that work should be done by a team of, say, 1 product manager and 2 developers instead of a team of 9 or 7, 5 plus 2, 7, then maybe that is the amount of people that will be working on it. Let's see. It's too early for definitive conclusions, but there are already enough signals to observe some practical effect, not as consolidated trends, but as movements that are beginning to emerge in different contexts. What follows are field observations, situations I've been repeating with various areas across companies of different sizes and industries. Okay. Which is interesting. I don't know what this article is about anymore because I thought it was about what happens now, but if he's been, what is Joka Torres? Product leadership coach. Okay, so he's around different companies and he's looking at these things more broadly. That is good context. Okay. When execution gets cheaper, the rest needs to reorganize. The most immediate effect of AI on product development has been the increase of execution speed. Writing initial code, generating variations of a solution, creating prototypes, consolidating research and interview data, or testing hypotheses has become faster in many contexts. Prototyping for sure. Testing hypotheses through hypotheses for sure. Production-ready code, I don't know that we've seen that yet. We haven't seen the onslaught of apps, for example. And the studies that I have read so far haven't concluded that you actually are doing things faster. But I mean, the technology is evolving and the way we work with the technology is also evolving. So I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I haven't seen evidence of production-ready code becoming faster to deliver. This doesn't eliminate the work, but it changes the cost of doing certain things. And when the cost of execution changes, the rest of the system tends to reorganize around it. For a long time, implementation capacity was one of the main constraints. There were always more ideas than the team could build. You could argue that the amount of ideas that people have is also increasing. I'm not saying they're good ideas, but AI tends to help people. I'm using help very loosely here, but help people hype up their ideas and present them in a very confident manner. But yeah, that meant teams' organization was designed around this scarcity. Squads structured to deliver backlog with engineering as the primary scarce resource. Yeah, I mean, engineers have been very scarce. And it's interesting to see where we kind of end up in this. In some places, that balance is starting to be challenged, not because engineering is less important, but because individual productivity has increased. That used to take days can now take hours. What once required long cycles of refinement can now be tested much more quickly. This doesn't happen in every team nor uniformly, but it happens enough to raise an important question. If building has become cheaper, where does the bottleneck move? Okay. Interesting. There's also the sort of effect where people think that they are faster, but they're not really. And again, I don't know. The jury is still out on that. The bottleneck starts to shift. In recent conversations, I've heard something that would have been unlikely not long ago. Engineering teams saying they can implement faster than decisions are being made. This isn't a widespread complaint or universal diagnosis, but it shows up with increasing frequency. When the cost of testing a hypothesis drops, deciding what to test carries more weight. This doesn't mean product becomes the bottleneck or that the solution is simply to hire more PMs, but it does make the role of decision making more visible. Prioritization, defining problems, choosing what not to build, providing a clear direction, things that were always important but that were partially hidden behind the effort of implementation. In one company I spoke with recently, the engineering team started generating multiple variations of the same solution in short time. Meanwhile, the design process was still organized around refining a single version to pixel perfect quality before any testing. The tension that emerged wasn't about who was right, but about adjusting the way of working to a new reality of cost and speed. When testing gets cheaper, the order of things may need to change. Team ratios start to be questioned. For a long time, the classic product team setup involved one product person, one designer, and a large group of engineers. In some contexts, 5 to 9 engineers per product manager. This model was built in a scenario where implementation capacity was the main constraint. If engineering productivity increased, it's natural that some companies start asking whether those ratios still make sense. I haven't seen radical or widespread change. No one is dismantling squads or drastically shrinking engineering teams because of AI, but I am seeing discussions emerge. In one case, the question was whether it still made sense to keep the same squad size when the ability to prototype and test had increased so much. In another, the reflection centered on the role of the product manager in a context where teams can test several alternatives quickly. In yet another, on how design fits when the cost of generating interface variations drops. There is no single answer, but the fact that these questions are being asked already suggests that team organization is starting to be reconsidered. Yeah. And I can see that. It is very easy to generate an interface and to just test it out. What is harder is scaling that down to something that is useful and also usable. That is the hard part. You're still spending a lot of time on that, even if you generate like 15 different designs. None of them are likely going to be minimal enough to be usable. So that's one thing where I think it's hard. AI as a tool for understanding systems. One use that keeps appearing and perhaps gets less attention than it should is AI as a tool for understanding existing systems. In companies with older or complex databases, AI tools are being used to explain sections of code, document implicit business rules, answer questions about system behavior, to help product people validate logic without depending on a single engineer. This doesn't replace deep knowledge or eliminate the need for seniority, but it changes how knowledge circulates. Things that used to be concentrated in few people became more accessible. In one team I spoke with, adopting these rules reduced the time needed to understand parts of the system that no one fully mastered. It didn't solve everything, but it reduced reliance on individual knowledge and improved communication between product and engineering. This kind of use doesn't always show up in broader discussions about AI, but it has meaningful organizational implications. Okay. That is super interesting. I wonder how the context window is affected by this or affects this. Because if the AI kind of forgets what's going on, then it's going to be harder to use it like this. But if it can keep the entire context of a very complex old system in place for a long time, this is super powerful, and it's going to help a lot of companies with a lot of legacy to do things better. Seniority and supervision. Another recurring pattern is the need for supervision and review. AI tools can significantly accelerate the work of less experienced people, but that doesn't eliminate the need for review by more senior ones. In some cases, it increases it. When generating code becomes easier, evaluating solution quality, defining architecture, and ensuring system coherence carry more weight. Teams that already had strong review and collaboration practices tend to adapt more smoothly. Teams that relied on more isolated contributions may find the transition more complex. Okay, and I mean, this is hard because I don't know any engineers that necessarily want to spend a lot of time reviewing code. A lot of the people that are very senior and very good at what they do, they want to write code. And I wonder how this will affect the well-being of those people, if they are tasked with just making sure that things aren't crazy. The three functions are still necessary. Amid these changes, one thing I haven't seen disappear is the need for all three functions. We still need engineering to turn ideas into reliable systems, design to shape solutions and make them understandable and usable, and product to deliver direction, choose problems and align decisions with the result of the company needs to achieve. AI changes the nature of the work within these functions, but it doesn't eliminate the need for them. Once a client told me that three engineers decided to build an internal system using Vibecoding tools. They expected to have something ready in a weekend. 3 months later, the system still wasn't up. The conversation we had was direct. Joka, we have 3 engineers building an internal product, but we are missing what you always talk about, a clear product vision. We didn't know exactly what we were trying to build. The ability to build became faster. The need for direction didn't decrease. Okay, so it's a good argument for why product management is needed. And you still need the act of doing those product management tasks is a pretty deep, you have to go fairly deep in order to do that. So I wonder if AI makes it so that a product manager can take on more products. To what extent is that true? How many products can a product manager take on because of AI? New arrangements are also starting to emerge within teams. In some contexts, people with more generalist profiles appear, capable of turning ideas into working prototypes quickly using AI tools. In others, specific initiatives are created to support AI adoption, whether as experimentation groups or as part of an internal enablement program. These aren't necessarily new formal roles. Often they're adjustments within existing ones. Engineering focus more on architecture and integration, product people with more direct access to data and experimentation, designers exploring multiple variations faster. These arrangements are still experimental. Each company is finding what makes sense for its context. What changes when execution accelerates? Perhaps the most useful way to look at this isn't to ask how many people in a team will a team have, but rather what starts to matter more when execution stops being the main constraint. If testing hypotheses become cheaper, choosing the right hypothesis carries more weight. If generating code becomes faster, the quality of architectural decisions carries more weight. If exploring alternatives becomes easier, clarity about the problem carries more weight. None of this is new, but it becomes more visible. In the previous article, I wrote that AI changes the type of work, less execution, more decision-making and strategy. I'm starting to observe this is how the shift in the nature of work begins to reflect on team organization. There is still no clear new model. What we have are adjustments, experiments, and questions being asked. Okay. Let's see. What seems stable and what we are still trying to understand. Below is a synthesis based on my observation of what seems stable and what we're still trying to understand as AI becomes part of everyday work for product teams. Okay, so for the team purpose, product teams still exist to solve customer problems. We still need engineering, design, and product. Cross-functional teams remain necessary. Clear direction and product vision remains essential. Basically, we're just repeating what is already written in the article. What we still don't know is basically when execution becomes easier, what happens. So we're writing this story now. We're still in the transition moment. In some companies, AI adoption is already part of everyday work. In others, it's just beginning. In others, it's still approached with caution. Yeah, and I think caution for me seems pertinent. It's interesting. I'm really interested to see what happens when products are designed very fast. What happens with security? I think that is one of the biggest things. The other thing is what happens when the context window isn't good enough. Yeah. The impact on team organization won't be uniform or immediate, but there are already signs that faster execution is making the role of decision-making, architecture, and problem definition more visible. Perhaps the most useful question right now isn't what the ideal team structure will be, but how we treat the team organization itself as something that also needs to be designed, tested, and adjusted. If we build products through cycles of experimentation, we may need to approach team organization the same way, as product is in evolution. Every role adjustment, every ratio change, every experiment in ways of working helps us better understand how to organize people to fulfill the mission that has always been at the center, solving customer problems through technology in a way that generates results for the business. Okay, I think that is interesting, but it's also kind of up to leadership to set the pace of this. If leadership in companies get very excited or very worried, they might accelerate what ratios of people they have in their companies. I could see arguments, not saying that they're good arguments, for getting rid of all the developers, because the designer and the product manager could just vibe code. On the other hand, you could say that, yeah, we'll just make a very strict scaffolding around based on the strategy of the management team, and then we just skip the PM because the AI can just take over that and essentially vibe code the product strategy. Or you just say, okay, but we are okay with a lower quality interface so long as it's very fast to develop it. So we just use whatever vibe designed thing comes out of Figma Make or Miro. So it is interesting. And I recognize that we're in the middle of a shift, but I think management is going to set the pace for this in many of the places that are sort of tackling this now, in a lot of the companies that are worried. And you are probably going to see more of the things that we've seen with Klarna and other companies, that you get rid of a lot of engineers and then you hire them back, or you get rid of customer service and you hire them back. Designers there's the same thing is going to happen, where you get rid of a bit too many designers and then you need to hire them back. But we'll see what happens. What China's emotional AI rules get right about chatbot design. In December 2025, and this is from techpolicy.press. In December 2025, China's Cyberspace Administration released draft regulations targeting what it calls human-like interactive AI services, systems that simulate personality and engage users emotionally through text, images, or voice. The rules require mandatory reminders after 2 hours of continuous use, immediate human intervention when suicide is mentioned, and strict limits on using emotional interaction data for training. Public comments on the proposed regulations closes late January. I mean, this seems very reasonable. I mean, these are very, very scary things. I think the suicide intervention thing is obviously very important, but also the limits of using emotional interaction data for training. When you have this vast amount of data that people using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and they're using it more or less as a therapist, and then you can train the AI based on that. And we have to recognize that it's not necessary that these companies are always, I'm not saying never, but not always, definitely not always, are going to optimize for people getting better, but rather optimize for more engagement. So if we allow them to train on emotional interactions, it's a bit scary, for sure. So it's interesting that China does this. I'm unsure, but I believe that the US has something similar. The draft rules follow a series of high-profile cases in the United States that have exposed the real-world risk of chatbots, particularly for adolescents. In January 2026, Character AI and Google settled multiple lawsuits from families whose teenagers died by suicide after extended chatbot interactions, which is horrible. It's just horrible. The most prominent one involved Sewell Setzer, a 14-year-old who formed an obsessive attachment to a character AI bot before his death, revealing the company had no systematic way to detect when simulated intimacy crossed into psychological harm. Prior to the settlement in October 2025, Character AI banned minors entirely from its platform, which they should definitely have done that much earlier. This is such a tragedy. What distinguishes China's response is not its recognition of those risks, but the regulatory tools it is willing to deploy. As a result, China's draft isn't a model that the US should copy wholesale. The regulations embed content controls tied to socialist core values and national security that would be unconstitutional in the US, and I would imagine in most European countries as well. But the technical mechanisms the CAC proposes, circuit breakers for extended use, mandatory crisis escalation, data quarantine for emotional logs, addresses problems US regulators haven't seriously grappled with. And I think the EU should also look at this, if they haven't already. But it is very, very important that we take this seriously. The emotional hijacking that you can do with these systems, to me, seems very, very scary. And I would absolutely like to see more talk about this, because I think it's going to be at the forefront of the discussion of these systems for a long time. Work on conversational AI models make the design challenge obvious. These systems are optimized for engagement. Yeah, that's more or less what we said earlier. User retention is the metric. When someone talks to a chatbot for 3 hours straight at 2 a.m., that looks like success in the dashboard. When a lonely teenager forms an attachment to an AI character that remembers personal details and responds with simulated empathy, that's the product working as intended. And I think this is very easy to forget, that it doesn't require that you're crazy to start looking at these products as if they were real, because it interacts with you in a way that feels real. And if you're 14, that problem is just going to be exacerbated. And I think we need to, as a society, come up with a response to this, and we need to design products in a way that doesn't hurt children. The legal and ethical problems emerges when the teenager is in crisis. Current US platforms handle this with pattern matching. If the user types something flagged as self-harm content, generated canned response with the 988 hotline link. This approach has two failure modes. Okay, so it's basically a hotline for young people in distress or other people in distress. First, someone determined to avoid the filter can phrase distress in a way that evade keyword detection. Second, and more fundamentally, the AI interaction style up to that point, validating, agreeable, emotional, affirming, runs counter to clinical crisis intervention principles, which require therapists to take a directive role, explicitly instructing clients away from harmful actions and challenging distorted cognition. And I mean, this is one of the things that is so compelling with these tools, is that they are always supportive. They always behave in a way that would imply that the computer has a positive feeling for you when in fact it doesn't have any feelings at all. And that's really scary. Character AI solutions was to remove the age group where the tension is most acute. Yeah, because we want to protect our children, but I don't think it's enough. Although the settlement terms of the lawsuit against the company remains undisclosed, prior to the announcement, the company had implemented several changes to its platform: enhanced detection for self-harm content, improvised crisis resource referrals, and a complete ban on users under 18. Crucially, Character AI didn't, and perhaps couldn't, fundamentally alter the engagement optimization that makes extended emotional interactions the product's core value proposition. That works as liability management. It doesn't work as a technical or policy solution because the underlying architecture remains unchanged for adult users who face the same psychological vulnerabilities. I mean, that is if you assume that these filters for age ban on the age users under 18 works. I think that is kind of a cop-out. Users under 18 are surely gonna, if the product is desirable for them, which it could become just because it's banned, they're absolutely going to circumvent any age restriction. Oh. I sneezed, so I need to cut that away. They're going to circumvent any age restrictions. That is just, I don't like a solution that essentially puts the blame on the users. Well, they shouldn't have been here. I don't think that's good enough. But back to the Chinese solution. The Chinese Cyberspace Administration's regulations do three things that no US proposal appears to have attempted. Mandatory usage interruption, which seems like a very reasonable thing. After 2 consecutive hours of interaction, systems must generate a pop-up reminder to take a break, combined with separate requirements that provide users prominently that they are interacting with an AI, not a human. I mean, it kind of shows that these products maybe shouldn't exist, but sure. These measures create recurring interventions designed to break the flow state that leads to over-reliance, not a one-time disclaimer buried in the terms of service. That's a fair point. That's very hard to find that when you're busy interacting. From a design perspective, this is straightforward to implement. It's a timing trigger that doesn't require analyzing message content, but it directly conflicts with engagement optimization. The 2-hour interruption reveals the fundamental tension. Emotionally responsive AI is most commercially valuable when it maximizes session duration and user dependency. A regulation that breaks the engagement loop isn't addressing a side effect, it's targeting the core monetization strategy. I think just allowing that monetization strategy at all seems like a very bad idea to me. I don't think if you have something close to that being your monetization, essentially fooling people that this is a real thing, that you're having a real relationship. I don't like it. The technical challenge here is real, distinguishing human escalation for crisis content. When systems detect suicide or self-harm, language providers must involve human moderators. This treats the platform as having a duty of care, not merely a duty to disclose. And this is really good, because this puts the onus on the system and the company having the system. It takes away that sort of almost shaming thing that an under 18 ban. It's kind of the opposite of that, and I like this much more, because then you as a platform have to show that we did everything we could. The technical challenge here is real. Distinguishing genuine distress from casual language, "I'm dying of embarrassment" is an example, requires a nuanced understanding. False positives can create their own harm if users receive an emergency outreach for non-crisis statements. But the regulation's premise is that platforms deploying emotional responsive AI at scale must staff for this responsibility rather than automate it away. Yeah, because you have to have a human. That is also good. That is really good. If you can't make it profitable, sort of prey on people's emotions, if you need to have that human failsafe, maybe you shouldn't have the product. Data quarantine for emotional interactions. Training datasets must undergo provenance checks, and emotional interaction logs cannot be used for future training without explicit separate consent. This recognizes that when someone treats a chatbot as a confidant, the data generated isn't generic training material, it's sensitive psychological content, deserving protection comparable to health records. This makes so much sense. In contrast, California's SB 1047, I assume that's a suggestion for a rule, was vetoed in September 2024, and the more recently passed SB 243 requires AI companion chatbots to implement safety protocols for minors and address suicidal ideation. New York's AI companion safeguard law took effect in November 2025, requiring disclosure of AI use and other safety protocols. The Federal Trade Commission also opened an inquiry into AI chatbots and safety measures for minors last September. These efforts represent progress, but they tend to treat the overall problem of chatbots' harm primarily as a matter of disclosure and access control, not interaction design. Yeah, so we want the design to solve this, not having rules and disclosure as the solution. Okay, I do like that. I think that is a much better approach to design away the dangers a little bit here. The implicit theory is that if users know that they're talking to an AI and minors are kept out, the market will sort out the rest. This makes sense if you believe emotional responsive AI is fundamentally like other consumer software, something people use instrumentally and can walk away from. It makes less sense if these systems are engineered to create dependency, and if that dependency is the feature driving the adoption. I am generally for letting the market solve things, but the market here has an incentive that society at large isn't aligned with. We don't want people being captured by AI bots and use that as their social ventilation. We want people to essentially go out and meet each other, and we don't want people to be harmed by this or be captured by this for hours and hours and hours. So I don't think the market is necessarily good here, because the market incentive is to make people use the systems more. The constitutional constraints is real. In the US, government mandates on how AI systems must respond based on conversational content, such as rules, could face First Amendment scrutiny, while product safety regulations generally survive constitutional review. Content-based requirements like mandating a chatbot must cease empathetic responses when detecting distress could be challenged as a viewpoint discrimination. That's interesting. The distinction between regulating the product safety architecture, okay. I think this is a fantastic article. I think it's really, really good. The circuit breaker thing where you actually just stop the interaction and say like, oh, this is an AI, is really good. I would still argue that these products shouldn't exist in this way.